All right. I would like to introduce Carol Patterson. Carol is going to present on the challenges and solutions our region's water future. Carol is from the Edwards Aquifer Authority. She has a long track record of advocacy and leadership on regional water issues, including service on the board of directors of the Edwards Aquifer Authority predecessor organization, the Edwards Underground Water District. She's been involved with this for a long time, and she has a very deep level of experience. Her community service on water issues is focused on controlling costs, preserving water quality, respecting the environment, and optimizing management of the Edwards Aquifer for water supply and spring flow. And all that is very important to us. She has a particular interest in strategies such as aquifer storage and recovery, soil regeneration, and low impact development. Most recently, she became president of the Edwards Aquifer Conservancy, a nonprofit support organization for the EAA. She serves as president of Regional Clean Air and Water Association as an associate member of the South Texas Geological Society. Join me in welcoming Carol. And if you just give me a second, I'm going to switch over and bring up her program, her presentation, so that we can share that with you. All right, are you seeing that now?
I am. Yes, is everyone else?
Let's see if I can get to full screen mode. Okay. Are you seeing it, Carol?
I see it.
Okay, you may proceed.
Okay, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you all. I've looked at the Master Naturalist websites and I'm very impressed. I think your knowledge and energies to care for and share understanding of the natural world that sustains and binds us all together are incredibly important. And I have served for more than 25 years on the Edwards Aquifer Authority. I've taken numerous courses in geology, recently received my permaculture certificate, which was a life changer, I think, and feel as if I have just begun. Adding water to aquifer recharge was why I originally ran for office years ago, and it now looks as though that is beginning, although not the way I originally envisioned. So let's ground ourselves with this regional map. The Edwards Aquifer in the San Antonio region is 180 miles long approximately from Uvalde to Kyle, 5 to 30 miles wide. And the artesian zone here is in yellow, where our wells are under pressure, the recharge zone in blue, where water enters the aquifer, and the orange contributing zone is where 80% of our recharge originates. That 5,400 square miles of contributing zone covers the watersheds of 9 rivers from the West Nueces to the Blanco. For the most part, the contributing zone is outside the jurisdiction of the EAA, as you can see from the red outline there showing you the counties of the Edwards Aquifer Authority. Average recharge is 700,000 acre feet, but there's a wide variance every year. It's gone from 43,000 acre feet in 1956 to 2.4 million in let's see, that would be 1992. it's been close to the average about 20 times out of those approximately 90 years. Water flows from east to west, or sorry, west to east through different porosities in the aquifer, through conduits to a fine-grained matrix. A drop of water falling in Uvalde may reach San Antonio in 50 years, but pressure determines how quickly the impact of a large storm will pass through. All-time high aquifer level reached 703 feet mean sea level at the Bexar County Intex well in 1992. But by June of 1996, the level at the J17 well had dropped from over 700 feet to 627 mean sea level, the current stage 4 reduction level. Even with our ceiling on pumping, aquifer levels can drop dramatically in 4 years. About half the annual use goes to pumping for water supply and half to spring flow at Comal and San Marcos Springs. Okay, we're ready for the second slide. And
let me see what's going on here. There we go. Let's see if it's gonna, as if it's gonna advance. There we go.
great. What you see here, 172,553 acres, mostly of recharge loan, has been permanently protected since the Edwards Aquifer Protection Program began in the year 2000 and then expired in the year 2021. The intent was to protect the quality of water entering the recharge zone up gradient of San Antonio Water System's wells, because San Antonians were taxing themselves to do this. It was an 8-cent sales tax. Other City of San Antonio funds have now been dedicated to continuing that program, at least for a while. Edwards Aquifer Authority has a lot of programs to protect water quality, and the most important, I think, of those is finding and remediating or plugging abandoned wells that can serve as conduits for pollution. We also regulate storage tanks for hazardous materials on the recharge zone and educate and cooperate with fire control on the recharge zone so firefighting water pollutants don't drain down into a sinkhole. Most of the water quality responsibility actually is carried out by TCEQ, who enforces water quality rules. We have double trouble. And I'd like to go to the next slide and talk about firm yield. More than water quality is at stake. The question is, how much water can we count on from the Edwards Aquifer for water supply every year? And to start is to ask the question, what is the firm yield? And these little diagrams I usually draw on a blackboard, but I think we can get through them. And on the left, what you see is a schematic of a river flowing to the ocean. And your firm yield, since you have no storage, would be the driest place, the driest day of the driest year. That would tell you what you had in drought to count on. In the second diagram, what you see is a dam drawn there, but it's allowing all the water to flow through the floodgates. In other words, it's not storing any water and it doesn't make it exactly useful. In the third diagram, what you see is a dam that is backing up water. And the way you would figure firm yield is to figure out your years of drought. You'd subtract off evaporation where those arrows are going up, and then you take the rest of the water and divide by the number of years of expected drought, and each one of those segments would be the firm yield of amount. However, what you see, if you were to use this to represent the Edwards Aquifer holding water, what you see is a little red dot near the top. That dot is where the springs emerge and actually where they would stop flowing if the water dropped below that, so that the actual firm yield of the Edwards Aquifer is not the 1,000 feet or so to the bottom of the wells. It is just to a level where we will be able to keep springs flowing, to keep endangered spring species alive and their habitat functional at Comal and San Marcos Springs. So this is a serious challenge. When the region was sued by downstream to say to say that we were actually Fish and Wildlife was sued to say that they weren't protecting the habitats at the springs. It was decided that the springs had to be kept flowing even in a repeat of a drought of record with a natural supply of water. That was an extraordinary challenge because in 1956, with a quarter of the population, the springs at Comal stopped flowing. Next slide. So what you see here is that the region came together to plan, rather than letting the federal judge plan for us, we came together to plan what sort of measures could keep the springs flowing. And I would say that actually I would list the Regional Water Conservation Program first. The region paid for 20,000 acre feet of conserving water. What they paid for was not just conservation, but conservation in terms of not wasting water. And how you would do that is check out your pipes for your water supply system. As we all know, we have been having problems with pipes leaking in the drought, but they felt we could pay to save 20,000 acre feet, and that 10,000 of that could be put aside and not used in order to help support spring flow. The second program is the Voluntary Irrigation Suspense program, and that was for farms who could pump during times of plenty, but choose whether or not to join a program to be paid not to pump during drought. The third possible and part of the solution was aquifer storage and recovery. As you probably know, SAWS has an aquifer storage and recovery facility in the Carrizo Aquifer in South Bexar County. And so for aquifer storage and recovery, just like VSPO, you pump during times of plenty, but don't use it. Instead, you pump it to the Carrizo where it won't flow out the way it would flow out from the Edwards. And then you can pump that water back in drought, and you can pick where you are going to choose wells in the SAWS system to not pump. And what SAWS has done is interconnected its 11 levels of system. And the wells that they do not pump when they're pumping back from ASR are the wells in Northeast Bexar County in the flow path to Comal Springs. So it has a beneficial effect on spring flow in that way. And then there's critical period. And I think you could go to slide 5 for that. And I think you all are pretty familiar with this. You can look in the lower right, and both for the San Antonio pool and the Uvalde pool, when we reach stage 5, the reduction amount is 44%. So we have, I think, never actually reached stage 5. Um, but when you add up the critical period plus the conservation plus the farmers not pumping when they're paid not to do that when they sign up, plus pumping ASR back, the firm yield of the Edwards Aquifer has been reduced, and it has been reduced astonishingly. It is either, and I haven't gotten a straight and a definitive answer, it's either 218,000 acre feet or 263,000 acre feet. That's either the average pumping of the 50s or more like pumping of the 60s, the higher level. And that's an extraordinary reduction with 4 times the present population of the 1950s. There was an outstanding success. Comal Springs continued to flow in the 2011 to 2014 drought with 4 times the population of the 1950s. But as I said, the firm yield of the aquifer was reduced seriously. So what are the threats that we're facing for the future? I think you all probably could count them off on your fingers. In addition to pumping reductions to protect springs, there is population growth with increased demand. And if you go to the next slide, it shows this population in the 50s going through to 2021, the US Census figures. And more population, about 4 million people are expected by 2050. That means more straws into the aquifer. Now, the Edwards Aquifer is limited to a ceiling of how much we can pump, but the Trinity, which is adjacent and north of us, is not now limited and contributes to Edwards Aquifer recharge. The next threat you have all seen, development with increased impervious cover. And I thought you might like to see some overview slides, so you can click slowly through the next 4 slides. This is north of 1604, and if you look at Stone Oak in this one, you hardly see any streets except for major ones. And then you can go to the next. That's Stone Oak in 2021. And on to the next. This is a schematic where they show the development just in red, and that's 2001. And then the next one, 2019. And it is an extraordinary amount of development, which is continuing. The other threat is climate change, which I think we're all aware of too. And the effect of that is likely to be increased larger floods with longer droughts. And interestingly enough, that also pretty much matches the effect of increased impervious cover, because water will run off quickly and won't soak in and won't go, it can go across the recharge zone without time for as much water to soak in. So it could mean diminished recharge even with bigger floods. So the widely held assumption, and there's a USGS statement that you can turn to next, which just their statement about how climate change can affect natural disasters. And USGS is very careful about what they say. They're a good source if you want a conservative description. One of the things that the Edwards Aquifer Authority is doing as we come to a time when we have to apply to renew the incidental take permit that we have to pump from the aquifer that we got with all the measures we listed to reduce water pumping to protect springs, is, let's see, I just lost track of what I was about to say. But anyhow, we have to renew our incidental take permit because the first one was only 15 years long. And the reason for that is they did not know how to take climate into effect or climate change into account. And so now it's expected that climate change is going to be taken into account, and we may apply for probably a 30-year permit the next time. And it's a widely held assumption when I talk to people that there will be greater reductions, which sounds pretty serious. And what I would like to do with this, the rest of this story, is to tell you about things that I think we can do and that give us a lot of hope and that can make us feel like we have a very useful place to put our energy, because there are some amazing tools. And I do want to say, these are, at this point, my opinions that maybe, I hope, will be adopted by the board. But at this point, part of this is my opinion. The first is more aquifer storage and recovery. To give you an example, let's say you have a choice of a 4% reduction in pumping during stage 5, that's the last increment, or pumping back 22,800 acre feet from ASR. And those are equivalent. Those will have an equivalent effect on the spring flow in preserving it, more or less. And I say that because if you compare pumping back water that you've put in storage to near the springs where you can forbear pumping, that's a reliable way of affecting the springs. If you do the 4% region-wide, some of the pressure effects will not affect the springs for a while. Also, if you order a pumping reduction and it's as serious at 44%, you have to hope that people can meet it. I know that there's a well-trained population and people are most people anyway, like to be careful. But if you're making seat belts and you can't get out your order without using the water, you may pump more. Or if you're making salsa, you can't do it without water. So I think that actually having the water in storage is more reliable than a pumping reduction. The other thing that I think is something to be taken into account is that when you do serious pumping reductions, what happens is the water systems have to go find water to make up for it elsewhere. That means they build projects. And in general, the projects are not nearly as environmentally friendly as just pumping water underground. And they also have a high cost. If you compare, for example, the water supply from Vista Ridge, which cost San Antonio $2.7 billion, the ASR is about 1/10 of that cost. We paid about $250 million to build the facility. And so you have a lot of reasons to think that ASR might be better than more pumping reductions. And please save your questions because I really want to hear them. Now, I think it's remarkable that the Texas legislature has already requested a study of ASR, aquifer storage and recovery, in the Carrizo from Bureau of Economic Geology. It means that we don't have to start from scratch to look where else we might store water. And if you go to the next two slides, you will see a Journal of Hydrology write-up on the Bureau of Economic Geology report assessing aquifer storage and recovery feasibility in the Gulf coastal plains of Texas. And if you go to the next slide, you will see that they think Austin and San Antonio would be especially well suited to use that, as well as College Station and Nacogdoches and Tyler. So that's very hopeful that we already have a start on looking at that. It's not that you can jump in and do it the next day. You have to look at where's the best place to put it in order to benefit the springs in drought. Where's the best place to put it so you somehow don't run into controversy about the spot that's been chosen, that it can be legally done, among other things. But I think it's very hopeful that ASR is beginning to be seen as a solution of choice. And I think it's really remarkable. I don't think SAWS gets enough credit for having had, I think, built the second largest ASR in the country. So less cost, greater liability, regional benefit for all the aquifer pumpers, because what would happen if you pump back instead of having more reductions is that all people with a permit would get a benefit, from the farmers to the west to the springs people to the east, in terms of what water they were allowed to pump. The springs would benefit, and even the downstream river, where those folks are concerned about what water they have in their river, would find that to be the most reliable way to solve the problem. Then I'd like to go on to the next slide. And I think many of you may be familiar with this book. Gabe Brown is a remarkable farmer in North Dakota who took his land that was a normal farm that was tilled in an ordinary way and left open to the sun for most of the year, and chemical fertilizers. But he started using regenerative agriculture, and he changed the infiltration on his land from half an inch an hour to over 30 inches an hour. You can watch a TED Talk, just look up Gabe Brown TED Talk. In that talk, where he made the presentation before he wrote the book, he'd only gotten to 11 inches of infiltration, but in the book, he's gotten to over 30 inches, which is remarkable. Well, how did he do it? The first thing is not to till. You want to do the least disturbance of the soil. You want to armor the soil with cover crops. You want a diversity of native plants, not a monoculture, because you want roots of different kinds and different depths and different requirements. And you want live roots in the soil that can carry the carbon that plants create from photosynthesis down into the soil. I used to think that carbon in the soil mostly came from the leaf litter that decayed. And I have found that the trees and the plants are far more instrumental. They essentially are exuding carbon honey into the ground, which is then traded with the fungi, and the fungi bring the trees the minerals from the rocks below. And so if you take our 5,400 square miles and say we could increase the infiltration, and this is just a mind experiment, but if we could all get together and increase the infiltration on average, just 2 more inches across the whole area. Now, some places you couldn't do it, there are roads, but and buildings and so on, but other places you can probably do more. You could actually increase the amount of infiltration by 576,000 acre feet. And that's more than SAWS pumps every year. So if you want to see the testing of how this would work, the Edwards Aquifer Authority has a field research park out on Cibolo Creek. And I think if you call with a group, maybe the master naturalists would like to go out and have a tour, you can see where berms and swales have been set up with different trees to hold them down, and where in the places that they've treated, no water has run off even in a very large rain. It's soaked into the ground. And what we are doing out at that, or our staff is doing, is actually taking measurements of how much carbon is absorbed, is placed in the soil, because the NRCS says they give you a figure of 27,000 gallons per acre per percent of carbon. But that's a general figure. We need to know for our climate and our soil and our vegetation. So very careful measurements are being made out at the Field Research Park. So the one more thing that's also an opportunity is low impact development. San Antonio River Authority published a 500-page guidance manual, which, and I think, oh, do go to the next slide after Gabe Brown. This is just the soil food web. And I have to say, I am amazed by the billions of microbes in an acre that interact, that carry messages between plants, I think, and that help create carbon glue in the soil, that are all part of this habitat, is all part of the nature taking care of us if we would just let it do it. So you can go to the next slide as well. And what happens, I dug down into some soil out in the hill country, and if you pick a handful of soil that has that good soil glue and has good life in it, you can squeeze it, and it almost, even though it's not clay, it will hold your fingerprints on it, or at least the marks of your fingers. If you leave that out in the sun to dry, I couldn't get the picture or the video mounted, but you can just blow all of that soil off like dust if you've left it out in the sun to dry. To go on to just the third thing that I think would be possible out in the contributing zone and the recharge zone would be low impact development. And the Sentinel Landscape Project is now testing 4 different kinds of pervious street to see which one works best in our area again. And I know that Ennis, Texas replaced their main street with a pervious street and then layers of filtration under the street. And you can find the San Antonio River Authority guidance manual online. But they replaced under the street a sort of almost layers of filtration, so that they planted trees up and down the main street and never have to water them. So it's things like that are wonderfully exciting. I don't know the cost, but I think you have to compare it also with what it costs you to put pipes in the ground. So if we were to do this in the recharge and contributing zone, it's a lot of different people who are involved. From the state agencies to the federal agencies, to the local nonprofits, to the water districts, to the communities, to the counties. But I would say that I'm very hopeful that we could actually do it. Camp Bullis has pulled together 40 collaborators to help them set up protect their landscape so they can continue to do military training with the night sky. 40 collaborators already. And the New York City Watershed Memorandum of Agreement that started, I think, in the 90s has 79 participants, including federal all the way to local. And my dentist tells me that if you drive up to an area of the watershed where you're not supposed to be, the police may show up. So I think that we can do this. I think that we can do it not so much with regulation, but with telling everybody what they can do, showing them what they can do. I think it's just a pleasure to meet you guys, and I am so delighted that you called on me to come and speak with you tonight, and I would like to take questions. Oh, did I forget anything? No, I don't think I did. Except, yeah, Edwards Aquifer Authority itself has started a program that will look at its next generation program, will look at how we can both protect we'll see if the EAPP stays around, but we'll continue to protect lands for both protecting near the springs and absorbing water. So I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Carol. We've got some great questions in the chat. The first one is there any way for COSA or Edwards Aquifer Authority to catch more water during our tropical rainstorms and direct it into the aquifer?
Right now, there's a way to do it. The question is, where do you want to catch it? You can do it probably in the contributing zone. In the recharge zone, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality is charged with not allowing the area to be polluted, which means they are requiring people to line their catchment basins with plastic to keep the water from soaking in. And I think that we need to design some new ways to do that and to give them permission to be more flexible. So.
And pumping to and from the ASR, does that have an energy cost?
Yes, it does. But I would say that it is well worth it, considering if you compare the ASR, say, with Vista Ridge, you've got similar operational costs in terms of having to pump water. So, but the ASR is closer, and the water can be pumped to downtown San Antonio and then water transferred up nearer the springs. So I think that I don't know the exact cost. So.
Okay. And do the conservation easements of the Edwards Aquifer Protection Program require landowners to create improved recharge or other land management changes that will improve recharge?
No, not now. But what I would hope is that as we purchase more easements, that we make provision for being able to do these strategies on the land with the permission of the owners. I think there are probably many people who put their land in conservation easements who might be interested. And I think the hope is that the Edwards Aquifer Authority can incentivize that once we can actually nail down the numbers.
You were talking about the field research park. Where is that located?
It's out north of TPC Parkway to the east of the Marriott. And it's on Cibolo Creek. It's right adjacent to Morgan's Wonderland. And so lots of strategies and learning are happening. They have installed the tall weather gauges, moisture gauges. They have installed culverts where they measure runoff. They are testing the carbon in the soil and seeing what changes the plantings will make, so that hopefully we can get a measure like Gabe Brown did and be able to relate percentage of carbon with amount of water absorbed. So you could call the Edwards Aquifer Authority or go on the website and I think probably make arrangements if the master naturalist would like to take a group out there. There's also an education outreach center, which is part of now Morgan's Wonderland, and it's for, you know, everybody of every ability to walk through and learn a little.
Very excited to go to that new display. Can private businesses be encouraged to put impervious parking lots?
I think personally, but you'd have to ask the guys who are going to pay for it. They can certainly be encouraged. And I have talked to developers who were very interested. But if you have TCEQ rules that you have to follow, and you want to do something that's different, you probably don't want to get your head above the fence to be the first one to suggest it. So,
regarding the Edwards Aquifer Protection Program, can that be funded with green bonds?
I would think so. I'm not an expert in financing, but
The funding source is independent of the program.
the funding source is probably independent of the program. And it's certainly, the Edwards now has the Conservancy, which is looking for donated money to help pay for some of these things to relieve the burden on the taxpayer and hopefully get things done more quickly than we could by annual taxes. So.
Okay, one more question in the chat so far. So you guys get your questions in. The next one is, can riparian restoration along surface waterways help?
Yes, absolutely. I think that may be the first place that you want to do it. I think we need to change our definition of good drainage. Good drainage now means you get rid of the rainfall as fast as you can. And we want to keep it as long as we can, and we want to keep it out of the creeks. That may seem counterintuitive, but if you can keep the water out of the creeks and make it go there slowly, it may return to the creeks in a way that both tempers the floods and then leaks back to the creeks and tempers the droughts. So riparian areas would be, I think, a first choice, although there's another point of view, which is start at the top of the watershed if you want to fix something. If you go start putting your berms just at the bottom of the watershed, they're going to get washed out because the water's gotten up ahead of steam. So it will depend on the landscape. And one of the things that I learned in permaculture was don't do any clear cutting above a 12-degree slope. because you'll just get a lot of erosion. And so, and there was something else. Let's see. Oh, the other thing is that it is hugely important when you're putting in berms to put them actually precisely on the contours. And I've heard this from an expert for FEMA and EPA. I've also heard this from the A&M Forestry Service in their brochure. If you don't get your berms and swales exactly on the contour, if you're 5 degrees off, you may lose 20% of the water. So that's something to pay very close attention to.
Our next question is regarding gravel pits and mining operations. What are the impacts of the mining operations in recharge and contributing zones? And has there been a feasibility study completed regarding the reuse of those open pits for slowing the recharge and infiltration?
I'm not an expert in this area. I do know that an employee of CEMEX was very interested in seeing if they could cut their pits in a way that could serve after they were done excavating, could serve as recharge places to add recharge to the Edwards Aquifer to actually catch water. And so I think that's a matter of putting the experts in charge and saying, how do we do this? Not, can it be done?
Good comment there. That is all of the questions I'm seeing so far.
I know this is a very knowledgeable group, so I'm hoping that I did share something new that you hadn't heard before. And I hope you will think about ASR as a better solution than more reductions as we try to meet our environmental goals. So
If somebody has a question that comes up later, is there some contact information we can get in touch with you?
Jeanette has my email, so I could,
Give it.
yeah, I just got a new one because my old one gets full too fast.
We can get with Jeanette. Here's another good one. Is there a suggested list of actions that homeowners can make to increase filtration?
I love the question. I have a goal for myself of fixing our lawn so that it doesn't let any water run off into the street. And that may involve partly some rainwater harvesting off the roofs, roof areas, but also I imagine if you could, you don't have to, you can probably add your own sacks of manure instead of having cows come and graze. And for that part of the list that Gabe Brown has, and I wonder if I left out, I think I mentioned animals as well, but I would love to have people give themselves the challenge of seeing how much water they can keep on their land, and
Especially if they have hill country land,
and
ranches.
hill country land and ranches have wonderful opportunities, but I would love to see it in the city. I think it would decrease the heat island. I am miserable when more and more people in my neighborhood put in gravel instead of lawns and stick a few cactus in. It probably saves you a lot of work, but I think that it adds to the heat island. And, you know, some people can do it attractively, but I love to see the green. So,
Carol, the email address that you want shared, is it the one at mygrande.net?
I'll tell you what, let me try. I have just gotten a new Gmail address, so it would be Carol Patterson 202 at gmail.com.
Okay, is the Carol Patterson all together, or is there a period in between?
All together.
All right, I'll put that in the chat.
Great, thank you.
Got it. Cheryl got it already. Great, thanks, Cheryl.
Here's another question. Have SAWS and the Edwards Aquifer Authority considered using recycled water in a targeted area of Northeast Bexar County? For example, in the recharge zone during a severe drought as a way of temporarily supporting critical spring flows?
That's an interesting
SAWS
question.
has, but not as much as they should
I
have.
think I'm not sure that it would meet with, say, Parks and Wildlife's criteria or US Fish criteria to introduce recycled water right near the springs. But more distant from the springs, if there's, you know, now I'm sort of spinning the idea, if you would have to be distant enough from the springs so that you wouldn't affect the quality of the spring flow for the habitat. So
We know that native plants have longer roots. How can the Edwards Aquifer Authority encourage those plantings?
I think publish the lists, put them on the
Well,
websites.
If you had the political will, you do what NRCS, you could actually subsidize.
And, you know, in addition, I think NRCS might want to participate, the Master Naturalist. You have a wonderful website. You might have a spot to, you may have already done that. And, you know, it would be great to have SAWS put something like that in its bills. And I'm not sure who you would contact there, but I think if we could show, say we could get together a block of, say, you know, two sides of a street, and that group of people get together and do the best they could to keep drainage from running down the street, it could become an example that people could come and see. I have, in front of our house, I have FlexiPave in front of the tree, which is made of recycled truck tire and urethane and stone. And water actually soaks through that. It's not a cement sidewalk. And it has a layer of gravel under it. And it's also ADA compliant, and it's cool, which is wonderful. I took a piece of FlexiPave out in the backyard and set it next to a paver, and half an hour in the noon sun, I went back barefoot and I could stand on the FlexiPave easily, even though it was a dark color, but I could not stand on the paver, which I probably could have cooked an egg on. So, but you can look up FlexiPave online. And I think, sorry?
FlexiPave is at Arlington National Cemetery.
Oh, that's true. They
And in
use it in
Yellowstone.
Arlington National Cemetery. They use it in Yellowstone around Old Faithful. So it's catching on as well. I would love to have it as sidewalks, because then we don't dig up more of the aquifer to make the next sidewalk. So,
San Antonio, to change course a little bit. San Antonio is a big golf city. I think I read there's over 100 golf courses in San Antonio, something huge number. And the golf course I play at, I know I've seen purple pipes to indicate they use recycled water.
mhm.
Are you aware of any local golf courses that have also been redesigned to reduce water use or to gather more water?
I have not. I think they should be ideal for adding berms and swales,
And
and
grass.
water traps and
And intelligent grass.
planting varieties of, I would say, not just one variety of grass, but make all of your traps full of multiple vegetable matter, so that it's not a monoculture. And maybe there's a way of, I have to go to the golf people and see. I think you could find people who might be enthusiastic about doing something that would make people think well of them. Um, you know, preferentially play where they've treated the landscape well. So,
Good idea. So that's all the questions I'm seeing. I do want to remind anybody that cannot see the chat that we do have a number of good resources on our chapter website. If you'll go to our chapter website and look under resources, there is a tab for Wildscape information packet. Please take a look at that. Jeanette, no more questions here, so I'll hand that over to you.
Well, I want to thank Carol for joining us tonight and sharing a lot of good information. And I thank the group for your wonderful questions as well. I think it's made for a very informative discussion. And if there is nothing any further, I will dismiss you all. Thank you again, Carol, for joining us. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you, Bob, for arranging it. And good night, everyone.
good night. It was my great pleasure.
Thank you.
Good night, and thanks a lot.
Good night.